So what has Live 8 left in its wake? 26 million text messages of support and an unprecedented political movement across the globe. Or just the aftermath of a massive pop concert, the biggest ever litter clear-up in central London, and a revival in record sales for Pink Floyd. Well, to discuss the lasting impact of Live 8, I'm joined by the former Cabinet Minister Peter Lilly, who worked on AIDS projects in Africa for several years, and also by Eddie Izzard in Edinburgh, who's one of the organisers of Make Poverty History. Eddie Izzard, can I ask you first of all, what do you think that the lasting impact is going to be of Live 8?
Well, can I just say, firstly, I'm not one of the organisers. I'm just someone who is. I was here for the march where 250,000 people marched around Edinburgh, made a big white band for Make Poverty History. I'm not an organiser. I'm just someone who was asked to do that. So, best not to put me in that place.
Sure, but as a supporter.
Sorry?
As a supporter.
As a supporter. What was the question, the essential question?
Well, the question is, do you think that demonstrations like the one you're on today, the Live 8 concert, can they have a political impact?
Well, I think the thing that was happening up in Scotland, here in Edinburgh, on Saturday was a lot of the activists. It was the first thing that was set up in the big march, and that was 250,000 people. That was quite fantastic, and it took 3 hours to queue just to get on the march, which is an amazing thing. Live 8 was an amazing gig, and a lot of people watching that. Cynical people would say, well, you know, what's actually going on? All the celebrities, all these egos involved. I think it's right for people to be cynical, and they should just judge people what they do after these gigs. But essentially, I think the performers, that all of us, that celeb type people, were all dancing idiots, really. And if the dancing idiots come and then the media comes and pays attention, then the message can go through about this thing, about the G8 meeting, about what could happen there, and then people, ordinary real people, get involved, and it makes the message goes through and into, because it's on all the front pages, it was on all the, you know, it was on the television all the time, and so that does make a difference.
So Peter Lilly, perhaps not through the dancing idiots, but through the power of people that they managed to reach. You've been on the inside. Do politicians pay attention to these kind of demonstrations?
Well, they don't take any notice of demonstrations which are flat contrary to government policy. We saw the government ignore the 3 biggest demonstrations there have ever been in London on Iraq and the 2 countryside marches. But they can have an effect if they're pushing government to do something which is in line with its stated objectives, but forcing it to go further and faster than it otherwise would. And it can do so if it both harnesses emotion, which this certainly did splendidly, but also allies that with serious thought, which can permanently change the climate of opinion. And my sadness is that they didn't focus on the one issue where the leaders of the world need to be pushed further, which is access to our markets for African goods and African food. That's not even mentioned in the Make Poverty History manifesto. It was totally ignored by Gordon Brown today in his article in The Sun. They're just going to be pushed to do things they were going to do anyway. Drop the debt. Good, excellent. All in favour of that. We abolished all government aid debt, and it's now the multilateral debt we're, by consensus in this country, all committed to going on.
I thought justice in trade, but justice in trade is one of the 3 things. It's justice in trade, double the aid, and drop the debt.
But justice in trade, what does that mean? It says it's not free trade in the manifesto, and there's no mention in the manifesto of opening up the markets of Europe and America to the goods of Africa, only of closing the markets of Africa to any goods from outside, which seems to me a bad thing, but that's their privilege if they want to do it.
As far as I believe, although I didn't write the manifesto, I thought the justice in trade was about opening up the markets in the long term. It's not something you could do necessarily this week at the G8 meeting, but it's something, it is a place where you have to go to, where the reform of the common agricultural policy and the reform of subsidies in America, that has got to happen, and so that eventually that you get a roadmap towards that, so that Africa can trade into these markets.
Well, that's why I'm saying that we've harnessed emotion, but we haven't harnessed serious thought. It emerges you haven't even read the manifesto. I doubt if you've read the manifesto. Nobody's bothered to read the manifesto. Why bother serious thought, everybody says? We can all have a good time emoting. I've spent some years working on these projects. I feel very deeply about it. No one believes more passionately than me about ending poverty in Africa, but you can only do it by having serious policies which will work.
I think people from Make Poverty would say that one of the big parts of their platform, well, it's aid debt, but they are calling for an end to agriculture subsidies.
No, that's one of the manifesto.
No, well, I've heard them in many interviews.
I'll tell you why they didn't, because too many of the people who are actually making the thinking side of it, the propaganda side of it, are actually anti-free trade, anti-free market, anti-globalization activists. who've diverted it. It's become a vehicle for them, rather than the original intention, which was yours, which was mine.
Is this
I think
too
a lot of people
broad?
are anti-capitalisation, but they're pro-trade. There's a difference between manipulating markets and capitalisation and actual trade. Trade is the fundamental of humanity, of civilization.
Well, why don't they just talk about protection, which is stopping trade?
No, well, I mean, okay, so I haven't read the manifesto. I think a lot of people think maybe they haven't read the manifesto, but I'm saying that what I believe and what everyone's talking about on the Make Poverty History thing is about justice in trade.
We saw Gordon Brown's article in The Sun today. No mention of it. Why? Because we
well, come on.
I've got that
on television.
But you can't criticise the government for not wanting to end the common agricultural policy. We've heard them talking about that endlessly. Okay, but these are complicated issues, Eddie Izzard. How are you going to maintain the momentum once the G8 is over, when the trade arguments will move on through the course of the year to the World Trade Organization in December? These are hard things to sustain, aren't they?
Well, yes, but you would say that 20 years ago was Live Aid, and you would say that we wouldn't be able to be here 20 years later. It shows that we can sustain. There is fatigue, and people come and they go and whatever, but the activists, they stay on the program. So if we're here 20 years later, we're going to be here 40 years later, still pushing for it, and 60 years later. So the ideas are there. We just need to keep pushing it in that right direction.
You're somebody who clearly cares about Africa. At least this has put it on the political agenda in a way that it hasn't been for years.
Yes, and I pay all tribute to them for doing that. The sadness is they haven't harnessed serious thought alongside emotion. The combination would be immensely powerful. The emotion can be ephemeral.
I disagree entirely. You're just arguing about one point. What I'm saying is that you're saying is there, and Peter, you're disagreeing with. But it is justice in trade is what they're pushing for.
Eddie Izzard, Peter Lilly, we'll leave it there. Thank you both. And time now for a look at tomorrow morning's newspapers. And front page of the Independent, striking image there. The heat is on. Blair fights to save G8 deal on climate change after Bush rebuff. But will it be enough to save the world? And a map of the world news reports on it. The Times, the front page, G8 leaders squabble as street fighting erupts. And a picture of those demonstrations, some of the anarchists from Edinburgh that we saw earlier on in Paul Mason's report. The Daily Telegraph, that notorious quote from Jacques Chirac, the only thing the British have ever given European farming is mad cow disease. And the Sun's own inimitable take on the same story. Sneering Chirac says British food's rubbish. Don't talk crep, they say, the Sun. And The Guardian, picture there of demonstrators from the G8, and another story revealed how drugs war failed. That's